Hello, and welcome to Mahamudra for the People. Uh, and this is, I believe, our 38th session or thereabouts. Um, it's nice to be here. It's nice to see Shane and yeah, anyone else who's here. So, as we've done in the past, I'm going to continue on with the ninth Karmapa's pointing out the Dharmakaya. And I believe we're up to um, this instruction pointing out the still mind. And so we'll get into that in a little bit. But as we've been doing before or earlier, take a little bit of time to focus on the intention around why it is that we come to practice. So this is an important thing because it helps us contextualize our meditation practice. It helps us to kind of recommit to the ethics that are important to us, on an individual basis, and also to some extent on a collective basis. And it's a helpful reminder to come back to understand just how it is that our practice has become meaningful in our lives. And this is demonstrated by contemplation on the preciousness of, it's called the preciousness of human rebirth, which we could, I guess, say is, really a reflection on the uniqueness of this particular situation that we find ourselves in. And so that is the fact that we are, embodied as human beings. The fact that we are embodied as human beings allows us to have access to Dharma. The embodiment as a human being allows us to be able to generally communicate, to be able to have impact. The fact that we live in this time when Dharma is available is another aspect of how this form in which we arise as human is precious. And then, of course, even as humans, it's very special to actually have the ability not only to connect to Dharma, but have a desire to practice. And having a desire to practice is also very deeply connected to a recognition of all the ways that we've suffered in our life. I'm sorry, I need to attend to this. Just hold tight 1 second. Okay, I am sorry about that. I have been managing a week full of near constant crisis. So hopefully that's the last interruption I'll have. So in any event, coming back to the ways that we suffer, this was a good example of one of the ways that I suffer is time never being mine. My time is never mine. So in any event, if we can allow ourselves the ability to connect to how it is that we have experienced suffering in our life, and this is not to create the causes and conditions for us to feel overwhelmed or sad, but really generally it's called developing awareness for samsara, right? Developing awareness for the ways that we experience hardship, the way that our relationship to distraction, our relationship to attachment and aversion, our reactivity, and all of this contributes to our experience of samsara. And this is important because this becomes, the material that we use for our Dharma practice. Right? In the alchemical traditions, this would be the prime material, right? That which we bring to this alchemical transformation that happens over time. So taking a little bit of time to contemplate the preciousness of human rebirth, taking time to contemplate all the ways that we suffer, taking time to remember how fleeting this precious human rebirth is. And one day we will die, one day we may become quite ill, and all this is to throw into contrast the importance of taking advantage of the time that we have, taking advantage of the opportunity that we have to go deep into practice. And then, of course, there's contemplation on the defaults of samsara. And so that is really rooted in being able to understand what is a reliable and what is an unreliable source of refuge. So the practice of Mahamudra and the Mahamudra lineage is a reliable source of refuge. Playing the lottery is not. Of course, perhaps you might win, but chances are that's not going to happen. And so, the peace created by meditation practice is reliable. The assumption that if we just had more money, we would have more access to peace is not reliable. And so these are all kind of foundational, outer preliminaries, but they're important because they help us to contextualize our practice. Okay, so as we've also done, taking refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha, and everybody can do this in their own way. Taking refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. And again, taking refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. And then also taking refuge in the Lama, the Yidam, and the Protector. And we do this because it's the instructions of the Lama, the blessings of the Yidam, and the protective deep and resolved the commitment of practice embodied by protector practice. All of these things come together in a unique way to help deepen our practice. And taking refuge in the Lama and the Yidam and the Protector, the three roots. Taking refuge in the Lama and the Yidam and the Protector. And in this moment, we'll sit for about 12 minutes and then get into the text. So, as we've done in the past, allow yourself to rest into the present moment using whatever anchor feels comfortable. So it could be using the breath, it could be using a visualized object, it could be using an actual object in our field of reference. Whatever it is, go ahead and rely on that. And we'll just sit together for about 12 minutes. Okay, and slowly bring yourself back to this meeting. And take a little bit of time to check in and see what that was like. Um, before I go any further, I'd just like to name my exhaustion. So please bear with me. It's been a very long week, and I have not gotten a lot of sleep the past several days. So I'm going to be probably a little slow. So apologies for that ahead of time. And also, I will probably need to leave 5 minutes before our normal time. As I have another engagement right on the back to back with this that I need to prepare for a couple minutes for. So before I go any further, I want to invite people to bring any questions that you may have. You can do that in the text box. You could ask a question. Yes, I've shaved my beard and cut my hair. I had to do an interview with the Associated Press on Monday, so I had to look a little dapper for that. So again, people can ask a question in the Ask a Question tab at the bottom of the page, and yeah, in the text box. And thank you, Musumi. I'm okay. I'm just a little slow today. So, okay, I am sorry. I do need to take this. One second. No, oh, I'm sorry about that. I don't know what's going on in my life, but it's it's just funny. Um, so I know there's a question, and thank you, George, for the resting. Um, Yes, and yes, my life is pure chaos. Oh, okay. Okay, so Brett says he found the need to pendulate back to an object during open awareness during the sit. Yeah, I mean, that's okay. You know, things are changing all the time, and it is possible. Excuse me, possible to become attached and or rigid at times to our practice and what we use as a support, and then even just more broadly speaking, practice can sometimes get a little wooden, and it helps to have um, a little bit of a mature, for lack of a better term, relationship to practice where we can modulate things a bit as we need. So, for example, if one is very tired and using mind itself, right, the experience of mind as the anchor, can sometimes lead us into the experience of drowsiness, right? Increased drowsiness, dullness, this kind of experience of spacing out. Um, to be clear, the experience of spacing out in a way that is kind of takes us out of relationship with awareness of mind is not what we're going for, right? That kind of spaciness is something I have a lot of access to these days when I'm so tired. So when we find ourselves in need of modulating our practice, to go ahead and do it. And in the past, I've shared, a couple of these techniques that Bokram Che taught, and I think it also appears in this text as well, where you can visualize a white tigle or little, sphere of light at your brow as a way of kind of, raising the energy when you feel sluggish. And then if for some reason things are feeling a little bit frenetic, you can visualize a black tigle down at your navel. And that kind of helps to settle things. Very closely related to that is the gaze. A gaze downward tends to be settling. Gaze upward tends to be enlivening. Right? So, and there are also breathing exercises we can do and things like that to kind of change things up. That being said, it's also important to recognize the importance of rest, and getting adequate rest. And I can't speak for other parts of the world as accurately, but in the United States, at least, we tend to really wear ourselves out, both in terms of our expectations that we have around our productivity, and then the expectations that we hold others to as well. Right? So we can find ourselves in a vicious cycle of constant exhaustion because we're either not holding boundaries and caring for ourselves, or we become very kind of addicted, so to speak, to these kinds of ideas of productivity, right, which are rooted in our kind of capitalist way of looking at things. And then of course, kind of layered onto all of that ought to be a relationship that we can have with our practice that is very, 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 very relaxed and easy, right? There are all sorts of stories that are kind of can be interpreted as awe-inspiring or interesting. I've heard stories of people meditating on a windowsill as a way of maintaining discipline. And if they were, for long periods of time, if they fell asleep, they would either fall into the room where the window was, or if they fell backward, they would fall out of the building they were in, right? As a way of just kind of training and discipline. I've also met a teacher who used to practice as a boy with a butter lamp on his head, and he would sit in meditation, and that was a way for him to be able to train in vigorous sitting, and that's not really necessary for us. In fact, it's probably the case more than anything else that um, these kinds of like obsessions with rigorous practice and really kind of exerting ourselves is really just an extension of ego clinging and addiction to some kind of idea that we have to be rigorous. The truth of the matter is the more we engage our practice, the more we begin to recognize that when we are relaxed, our body is relaxed, our mind is relaxed, right? Our relationship to expectation is relaxed, right? Our relationship to needing to exert a lot of effort is relaxed. Then our practice becomes very free and open. Right? And so, I kind of urge people to experiment with that a little bit. Take time to let yourself be free, right? To be relaxed, to not worry about progress, right? To not worry about efficacy. Is this effective? Is this doing the trick? Am I making progress, etc. So, hopefully that's a little helpful. Before I go on any further, though, are there any other questions that people may have? Well, if there are, go ahead and ask them as you want. Yeah. Okay. So this next instruction is last week we looked at looking at the still mind and moving mind is the same or different, right? And so this is a way of looking at. Oh, sorry. There's a question from Cordelia. Could you share any thoughts on dedication of merit? I've been finding it difficult to dedicate merit while acknowledging the underlying sense that all beings are already perfect. It's easy to offer dedication of merit from the place of my own ego and difficult to offer it from a place of non-attachment. So, if I understand the question correctly, the issue is so really the dedication of merit, right, is basically a way of sealing our practice with a commitment to the well-being of all beings. So sometimes we find common or language in these things around this being for being seen and unseen, right? The dedication of merit is really an expression of generosity. It's an expression of commitment. It's an expression of understanding the, I guess you could say, like the existential conundrum that we find ourselves in. So commonly, when I do dedication prayers during the protector sessions or other times like that, I generally try and dedicate the merit to all beings who have died recently. To add a little element of specificity, but also to kind of connect with the fact that while I am in relatively decent health right now, so many beings in this world have died and died very recently, and may be wandering in the bardo. Right? They may be wandering between this life and the next. And so may the little bit of merit that my practice has generated, or tremendous amount of merit that my practice has generated, or everything that us collectively coming together has generated, may we dedicate that to help remove obstacles. Right? So it's really an aspiration to disrupt the experience of suffering that other beings have. Right? So um, I think it's worth, if it's difficult to connect to dedicating merit, I think it can be helpful to come back to these like the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma. Right? To come back to recognizing how we suffer. And it's easy to say, "Oh, I don't really suffer because I have this and that. I don't have a lot of needs and all of this." But when we look at our mind, right? When we look at our the way we relate to the world, we do tend to suffer. Right? And if we can identify that in ourselves, can we allow ourselves to identify this in other people as well? Not identify it in the sense of, oh, see, that person over there is suffering as a way of belittling them, but just this general kind of empathic understanding that here we are together, right, in this shared kind of experience, and we're suffering. Now, even while acknowledging this kind of underlying sense that all beings are already perfect, why not generate merit to them too? Where does it stop? Like, is there a line where you're like, okay, like, you've got enough. I'm not going to give you any more. Or here's my store of merit. I think that's the other piece too, is like, merit is not finite, right? Merit is really kind of, also connected, and the way we give is also connected to our relative experience of the imaginal, right? So we can visualize mountains and mountains and mountains of merit that we're offering, right? And we can visualize that the merit offered does specific things. And we can, even if we were to dedicate the merit to Buddhas, there's nothing wrong with dedicating merit to beings that are already awakened. There's no limitation. There's no doctrine around that. We can offer our relationship to skandhas, right? So our relationship to the way that we experience our senses. We can offer the merit, around our facing and interacting with the experience of fear and finding wisdom in that. Yeah, the beautiful thing about dedicating merit is that there really is no limitation. There's no limit, right? And so we can easily get into a place from time to time where we feel like, oh, I have limited energy, I have limited merit, I have limited stuff, that why give it? Why give it? Well, I mean, the truth is that you don't have limited merit. I was reading a meditation instruction earlier today. It was quite refreshing. It was such that, basically, like for people who are identify with a gradual path to enlightenment, then a gradual path becomes necessary. For those who are able to conceive of a natural arising path to Dharma that isn't gradual, then the experience of Dharma becomes much more fast and automatic and natural, right? And it's not that there's a value judgment between the two, right? But it can help us understand kind of, you can maybe say like our psychology around our relationship to realization. And if we think the path is going to take a long time, then it very well may. If we think that there is the opportunity for these kind of leap over sudden experiences, that opens the door to such experiences being available to us. So merit is not really a tangible thing that we can hoard, And again, so like, it's this stuff is fascinating because it really does highlight how patterned we have become by these Western values of rooted in capitalism um, and just hoarding a bunch of shit. Like, this is mine. I'm not gonna give it to you. It's a very kind of um, a two-dimensional way of relating, or maybe even one-dimensional way of relating to all of this. None of the merit belongs to any of us at any point anyway, perhaps. The idea of ownership of merit, my awakening, not your awakening, my awakening, is kind of, you know, uh, a little small. And I'm not saying that your experience is small, nor is your. I'm not also saying that that's your way of thinking, but the uh, you know, it awakening is multidimensional, and so it can help us if our thinking can be a little bit multidimensional as well. Um, so. Um, Um, any other questions? That was a good question. Thank you. Okay. Well, if there is, please feel free to chime in. Sip of seltzer. Okay, so we're going to get into Ninth Karmapa's instructions on pointing out the still mind. So before we looked at the still mind and the moving mind, and as a way of examining as to whether or not there's any difference between the two, right? And so again, I want to kind of give a shout out to how frustrating these instructions can be, because there's no answer that's given. Right? The answer is not 5 or 7 or 9 or pi. There is no answer. The answer is something that we all need to find for ourselves. Right? So when we look at the difference between still mind and moving mind, Karmapa doesn't explain what the difference is. Karmapa points out or asks penetrating questions around whether or not there is a difference. And it's up to us to bring into our practice the instructions to be able to learn this for ourselves. And so this can be a little bit of a downer for those who are really interested in the practice of Mahamudra as a way to gain knowledge. And the frustrating piece of this is the fact that the ego can't really be fulfilled by any intellectual knowledge in this practice, because that's not what it's rooted in. And in fact, as he points out in several places, and as we find in other related texts on Mahamudra, we're constantly constantly reminded to be careful of how we imbibe the Dharma in an intellectual fashion, and how imbibing Dharma and the consumption of Dharma, especially with respect to religious text, philosophical text, often messes up our meditation. Right? We end up filling our heads with what we think the ideal is, and we haven't yet engaged in kind of the heart of the practice, or the meat of the practice, in experiencing all of this. And sometimes we end up just filling these questions with information that we read from different places. So Karmapa says, in pointing out the still mind, that there are a few ways of doing this, and the first is by using this first way of looking, that you understand that the nature of mind, uh, the nature of stillness and movement, both of these together, is not a blank emptiness. And so you may say that within the state of stillness, you have recognized with certainty the mind which is not identified as something in terms of color, shape, and so forth, which is not to be defined as bright or clear or comfortable, at ease, inexpressible in words, and that is luminous, empty, and not identified as something. And so he reminds us that if this is just mere intellectual understanding, you'll be unable to get anywhere, because there will be no confidence. But if it dawns from within, this is the dawning of Vipassana from stillness, and you have seen the nature of the still mind. At all times, whether you're having good or bad experiences, look again and again and again at that nature and make it clear. Right? So, Karmapa comes back to asking us to look directly at the experience of the mind, still mind. So the still mind is a reference to the experience of mind when there's not a lot of thought activity, when there's not a lot of reaction to kleshas, and things of that nature, when our emotional volatility is perhaps not as pronounced. Right? And so he asks us to sit in direct experience of stillness. And in a self-aware, self-reflective way, like mind, being able to know mind, to understand with certainty whether or not the mind is definable in terms of shape or color, or whether the mind can be experienced as bright or clear, comfortable, at ease, luminous, or empty. This is where reading too much gets in the way. You read, oh, the mind is this, it's that, it's this, it's that, it's this, it's that. And there's an aspect of ourselves that really wants to be good and have good experience, right? So we often can just plug the answer in, right? But Karmapa, asks us to experience this. And so Sarah asks, is that why Anitsu Muzangwo said, if you must read a Dharma book, forget it immediately? Yes, this is exactly it. I mean, just consider for a moment, consider for a moment how patterned your mind is. And I'm including myself in this, with my patterned mind. So a patterned mind means we see things in a particular way. Right? We relate to, we have concepts that are important. Right? There are projections that may bring us meaning, they may not bring us meaning, but we project onto the world a particular way. Right? How often do we really allow things to arise? So we'll use the words arise authentically. But what does that really mean? Right? Arising authentically means letting things just be themselves. So letting a tree be itself, or a rock be itself, or letting our kids be themselves, letting our enemies be themselves, letting us be ourselves, letting the air, letting the situation be itself, letting our reaction be itself. Letting our heart be itself. Right? So it's so easy to read books about things and for the sake of accumulation of knowledge, right? But knowledge of what? You know? So Anizamo was very, sensitive to the fact that we will just we're a little bit like computers, and especially now that we have like little computers that we carry in our pockets, and so we're just check, 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 check. Oh, Dharmakaya, what's that? Oh, Dharmata, what's that? Oh, primordially pure mind, what's that? Buddha nature, what's that? And it's not that we should not know these things, but the more we just need to be careful about becoming over reliant on intellectual knowledge. So with respect to stillness, sitting with the mind and watching the mind. So when they say the mind is clear, what do they mean? How do you experience the mind is clear? Vastness of mind, what does that mean? Get out of the habit and into direct experience. So Ninth Karmapa goes on to point out that stillness that is without the faults of darkness and is clear and sharp and naked, with all marks of conceptual thought naturally pacified, is faultless. It's faultless shamatha, which abides one-pointedly in the nature of virtue. It is steady, it's comfortable, it's at ease, it's inexpressible, and yet there's something to be experienced. It's inexpressible, I'm sorry. Yet there's something to be experienced. Inexpressible and something to be experienced. By resting within that and looking, you realize that it's free from arising and ceasing, free from color and shape, and yet there is no fixating on it as being like any particular thing. The realization that there is knowing that is free from arising and ceasing should be understood as the dawning of vipassana from non-thought. So if there are thoughts, that's not necessarily movement. It depends on how the thoughts are arising in the moment. So when thoughts arise, how do they arise? And the thing is that they don't arise just one way, right? Sometimes it's this fast thing. If we're new to shamatha, right, thoughts can arise in a way that's just overwhelming. This constant kind of flow of thoughts. It's like a bubbling brook, just thought activity happening and happening and happening. At other times, and so that would be, the mind of movement. At other times, they arise almost like symbols. Thought dissolves. Thought dissolves. Klesha dissolves. Right? So there's not, even with these ideas of like still mind, moving mind, just because it's pointed out as still mind and moving mind, I mean, there's a binary right there, right? So, how can we kind of, use relative terms, but still mind and moving mind without, especially without, giving rise to preference, right? I think I brought up the other day, or even right now, like, when I sit right now, right? Like, I am so tired, it's like unbelievable. And so I can practice with that feeling, right? I can feel the heaviness of the exhaustion, right? My body feels heavy. Like my limbs are almost like, heavy. My mind, though, experience is not as heavy. And there's somatic response in my exhaustion. Right? It's kind of, the breathing is a particular way. The way I experience my body is a little different than when I'm rested. And yet, even though there's this heaviness of body, there's still an awareness. Right? There's still self-reflexive experience, right? Mind with the ability to know what is happening. Right? So we can be like in a really bad mood. I'm not in a bad mood now, but I get into bad moods. So we can have a bad mood and feel cross, and recognizing the experience of being cross, and just recognize it, not holding on, not feeling like like a viper, that kind of like bad mood, ready to sting. Right? You can feel that way, right? But rest into the experience of the awareness of that. And it shifts, right? It's no longer toxic. You can be in a bad mood and not toxic to yourself or others, right? By just experiencing that. Same way, good mood. So the, letting go of the way it appears. Again, getting rid of preference. Like, it's not about good is better than bad. It's really about, learning to let whatever arise, recognize it, and then allow itself to self-liberate, so that it doesn't even have the opportunity to become rooted in attachment or aversion. It doesn't have the opportunity. There isn't even the time necessarily for us to get into reactivity. And then sometimes we do get reactive, and that's okay too. We find ourselves reacting, and bring awareness to that experience. And it's not that we're bringing awareness like on a leash, like an animal or something. We're not like, come here, awareness. We're just learning how to kind of let awareness kind of naturally just experience what's happening. allow for the recognition, and let go. So Anjana asks, would bad mood reactivity be automatically toxic to people? No, not necessarily. I mean, there's sometimes being in a bad mood is important. Yes, sometimes it helps us to focus other people, right? Like, and part of my kind of endless tumult of this week, like, I had to deal with somebody in particular who was just like kind of obfuscating and just not accepting responsibility for their impact in creating a very difficult situation for many people, and like whole like organizational structures were kind of ground to a halt because of this one person. And so there could be an element of skill in being on the phone with this person and just getting in a bad mood with them and to point out, look, man, like this shit doesn't revolve around you. To express honestly, with clarity, frustration, right? To demonstrate some of this bad mood as a way of showing the person, oh shit, man, like, I'm really kind of actually causing all these problems. The difficulty at times for some people is doing it with skill. Right? So how do we, let that non-explosive experience of, bad mood, flow as a symbol, as a way, as a skillful means. It's not that we have to like open a can of whoop ass on everybody who we're not fond of. Like, that's not what the practice is about at all. The practice is about being able to experience and then experience the spaciousness in everything that happens. So the spaciousness in being in a bad mood, or the spaciousness in being exhausted, the spaciousness in being overwhelmed, or the spaciousness of being overcome with passion, right? The spaciousness is really the ability to be able to rest into direct experience of what's arising, experiencing it directly. Right? So not getting kind of tripped up into the storyline. Oh my God, this person just constantly fucking makes me mad, and they always do it, and I hate it when people do that. They always, so they'll always, right? Going back in time. In the future, I never want to have to deal with someone like this. Future. Right? Just rather than get wrapped up in that, right? Rather than getting wrapped up in the need to control, just experience it. And allow yourself to, very naturally let ourselves have a relationship that's rooted in awareness with this experience that sucks. So toxicity. So the toxicity piece is our own inability to not recognize our reactivity. Right? So like me being like, I'm not fucking pissed off. Don't get near me. It's not me, it's you, and it's you. It's this whole situation. All of this is bullshit. Like, I don't want to have to fucking deal with that. Like, that's the toxicity. That kind of, making it global. About a bunch of people or a situation or an institution or whatever, right? So how can we kind of get out of that, right? The quote unquote blame game of this. Oh, it's not me. It's like it's the government. Government's stupid. All of that is stupid. It's the inability to accept responsibility. And it's not that we have to be like, oh, I have to accept responsibility for what I'm feeling. No, it's accepting responsibility for like the fact that I'm tired and crabby and this and that, and just rest into direct experience of it, right? Without just me then picking up a phone and being like, oh, you know what I think about you? Like, I think that you're terrible, you know. I think that like, you shouldn't have the job you have, and but just going like off the rails. And it's hard. Like it's hard because of the way all of the way these kinds of things end up being very interrelated, right, or interconnected, right? So like chaos. Like last night I got a phone call at 1:30 in the morning, and I had to get up at 3, and and it was like kind of a bullshit phone call. And really, when my work phone rings at night, it's usually because somebody died. So I kind of like I didn't jump up, but I was like, okay, like I need to get ready. Get the phone call, and it's kind of like a bullshit question, and I'm like, okay. My wife told me later, she was like, I was so upset with that person, like they made me mad, right? And she was like, it was like incredible, like how just like easily you took it, and part of me was like, well, I was half asleep, so I don't think I had the ability to get irritable. But the second piece was like, I think I've trained myself to be able to kind of allow for the chaos to come and not jump right into a reactive mode in relationship to this, right? So the things, at least in my life, just kind of like pop off very quickly, right? And in bringing practice into that, I've been able to find a little bit of space in that, right? To experience the spaciousness of a phone call where they're like, so and so died, or so this kind of situation is going on, and I could be like, oh man, not on a Thursday night, or like or oh geez, like I wanted to be doing this, or oh I'm so tired, why can't I ever get sleep? It's just listening, listening to what's arising, experiencing the visceral nature of frustration, and then shifting into the next moment. Okay, I need to get dressed, brush my hair, brush my teeth, grab my keys, and get out of here. Yeah, I'm tired. Yeah, I would rather be doing other things, perhaps. But I'm here. So this is how, like Mahamudra does have a relatable quality. And I really, like, I'm not that comfortable, but, you can always make the argument about, like, increased resilience and how that's good for work and things like that. And it is, increased resilience, increased capability of not flying off the handle is beautiful for, relationships, relationship building. But at the same time, I'm really not that fond of, using that to sell Dharma practice, because that is a sales mechanism. But when we only focus on our meditation, like on the cushion, it's beautiful to experience mind, especially, still mind. Rest into that practice. I mean, there's nothing more deeply soothing and relaxing than that. But then at the same time, it is incredible to be able to, begin to train and moving through our daily lives and touching into the space that exists in everything that we experience. Experiencing the space in how we drink tea or seltzer. So I've got my seltzer can. It was like drinking pure space. That was my commercial. Commercial for Mahamudra seltzer. And being in relationship with people, experiencing the spaciousness of not getting involved in projections. You know, the spaciousness of letting people just naturally arise as they are. You know, this person who called me last night is an amazing person, and they have a mind so different than mine. And it was brilliant. And you know, part of me it still has a hard time understanding the way that mind works, but like, they had to bring a situation to me, a problem, something they wanted an answer to. And there's an element of like incredible beauty, even though they called me at 1 in the morning or 1:30 in the morning. You know, part of our experience of samsara really has to do with the fact that we identify it as such. Right? So we experience this as, you know, a time and a space filled with suffering. Oh, samsara is, you know, just messed up, and I'm stuck in samsara, so I'm relegated to just experiencing crappy stuff all the time and being heard and feeling all this stuff. But really, you know, when we blend, you know, we find the spaciousness in samsara, what does it become? You know, it totally changes. Yeah, we get sick and we die. Our loved ones get sick and die. You know, animals get sick and die. We experience difficult emotion. We experience pain, loss. But there's space in those things. Of course, the space is hard to connect to when we have such a galvanized reaction to these quote unquote difficult things. You know, things that are you know, not preferred. Now, this is why, like, you know, there's so much like tantric imagery around charnel grounds. You know, to find ourselves resting into the experience of death, and you know, especially at charnel ground, right? Like wild dogs around, you know, burning bodies, right? It provokes fear, sadness, you know, loss, depression, and all these things. And that's why, like, you know, yoginis and yogis go practice in these places, because it's a wealth of stuff that people discard, including dead bodies. You know, they just discard them, right? There. And this place of you know, the island of misfit toys is the place to practice Mahamudra. Right? This is the place where, you know, everything that's discarded is available as an arena for us to be able to learn how to train into the experience of spaciousness in death, the spaciousness in scavenging, the spaciousness of shady characters, the spaciousness of fear and anxiety, the spaciousness in loss. If we only surrounded ourselves by, you know, the symbols of high dharma, you know, like, it would be a little boring, at least for me. You know, it would. It's not really. That's not my, like, you know, place of hanging out where everything's perfect. You know. Yeah. I had to actually, around this time last year, but COVID was kind of popping off here in the city in the spring. I had to go go visit somebody who was self quarantining, you know, early on, and was like apparently freaking out. And he was in a motel, a really kind of shady motel, you know, filled with like drug dealers and stuff like that. And he had a hazmat suit on. And it was great because it was just like, what a weird scene of like shady people, this pandemic situation. I just gotten back from India. That was actually a day after I got back from India. I was, kind of going into this hotel with a doctor to go see if, if this guy was actually like gonna live. And I mean, what a rich thing, like all the fear, like, oh my God, like, what does this really mean? Like, um, you know, is this guy gonna be alive? Is he freaking out? And resting into that experience of all of those things without fear, without um, without putting up a wall, And so Mahamudra really is about, letting all the walls melt away. Good practice, quote unquote, good practice is really, when we can allow some of these walls down and we can experience the spaciousness in our limitations, experience the spaciousness in all the stuff that comes up. So anyway, how does this relate to, the still mind? Well, it does in the sense that the still mind, when we experience a still mind, there's a very heightened opportunity for being able to experience the vastness and the spaciousness of mind. Right? Things are kind of, it's a wide view, the still mind. Right? There's less activity. When you start to work with the moving mind, then learning how to understand our relationship to these things that arise, these thoughts, the relative frequency of thought, could be a lot of thought, or kleshas, lust arising. Of course, nobody here experiences lust, right? So when that arises, how is that experienced? It rises, there's space in it, and you let it go. Let go of the attachment and let go of the aversion. Like, oh God, I shouldn't be, feeling that or thinking that. That's not, Dharma. Well, if that's not Dharma, then, what is Dharma? If our own strong reactions aren't Dharma, then really, what are we trying to do? So, in any event, I'm going to pause here because the next instruction is pointing out the moving mind, and we don't have enough time to do that in a way that's not rushed. Oh, nice. Love is an angel disguised as lust. Could be. Could be. So in this moment, I want to dedicate any merit from this, session driven by exhaustion to all sentient beings that are struggling with difficult emotion in this moment. Both local beings, human, animal, ghostly, demonic, godly, and then also transnational, global, interstellar, by all beings caught in this web of reactivity with respect to strong emotion. May they learn to find ease in the experience of mind. May they be able to experience wisdom and space in everything that arises. And of course, may they become liberated, having experienced that And then may everyone gathered here be blessed with deep practice that they're able to take off their cushion, practice that they can bring to the experience of life, to the experience of benefiting others. May all beings benefit, may you be healthy, and may you achieve liberation in this lifetime. Thank you. And take good care. I'll see you soon.